All right, there it is. All right, well, hey everybody, if people are here. Oh, looks like there are a couple good. Katie and Karen.
I'm up here for you.
Good to have you with us.
Yep, we're in.
All right, man.
All right, yeah. I guess let's go ahead and get this thing going. We're gonna read all of Matthew chapter 23 today. Pretty likely we're not gonna be able to talk about all of it, so we'll probably break it up. But this is kind of the climax, or we're getting close, I guess, to the climax of Jesus's interactions with the leaders in the temple, the Pharisees, scribes, Sadducees, all those guys. And we've seen kind of these dialogues and debates, sort of, although debate implies it was kind of an equal match. Obviously, it wasn't, between Jesus and these leaders in the temple. But as Jesus is nearing his death, he's been going back and forth and really exposing their wrong thinking and their wrong character. And he's going to be a lot more direct, but not so much addressing them, but addressing his disciples in the crowd and say, hey, these guys I've been operating with, let me tell you about them. Let me tell you the true story. And that's pretty much what chapter 23 is going to be about. What else do you think we need to say before we read here?
You know, I think it's interesting to think about what Jesus is trying to accomplish in Jerusalem. You know, obviously the ultimate thing is going to be his death and the sacrifice there. But, you know, this week that he spends in Jerusalem, he is both pronouncing judgment and helping people understand why he's eventually going to destroy the city, you know, within a few decades. But the other thing he's trying to do is he's trying to teach people to disconnect from what they put their hope in.
Mm-hmm.
They were patriotic. They were, you know, devoted to this city and this way of life and their culture. And I think this is a really applicable thing. If we're going to be Christians, we have to understand that eventually God's going to judge all human institutions that are not his kingdom. And we need to be really careful about how much confidence we put in the leadership and the future. And here you have really Jesus appealing to all of them to not get wrapped up in that. They're going to have to disconnect from this if they're going to survive, you know, the coming judgment and be part of the kingdom. So I think we'll talk more about that, I think, as we go through this.
Yeah, no, it's super good. All right, well, let's read Matthew 23 and then let's start talking about it. Matthew 23, verse 1. Then Jesus spoke to the crowds and to his disciples, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees have seated themselves in the chair of Moses. Therefore, whatever they tell you, do and comply with it all. But do not do as they do. For they say things and do not do. They tie up heavy burdens and lay them on people's shoulders, but they themselves are unwilling to move them with so much as their finger. And they do all their deeds to be noticed by people, for they broaden their phylacteries and lengthen the tassels of their garments, and they love the place of honor at banquets and the seats of honor in the synagogues and personal greetings in the marketplaces and being called rabbi by the people. But as for you, do not be called rabbi, for only one is your teacher, and you are all brothers. And do not call anyone on earth your father, for only one is your father, he who is in heaven. And do not be called leaders, for only one is your leader, that is Christ. But the greatest of you shall be your servant. Whoever exalts himself shall be humbled, and whoever humbles himself shall be exalted. But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you shut the kingdom of heaven in front of people, for you do not enter it yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you devour widows' houses, even while for appearance's sake you make long prayers. Therefore you will receive greater condemnation. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you travel around on sea and land to make one proselyte, and when he becomes one, you make him twice as much a son of hell as yourselves. Woe to you, blind guides, who say, whoever swears by the temple, that's nothing, but whoever swears by the gold of the temple is obligated. You fools and blind men, which is more important, the gold or the temple that sanctified the gold? And you say, Whoever swears by the altar, that's nothing. But whoever swears by the offering that's on it is obligated. You blind men, which is more important, the offering or the altar that sanctifies the altar offering? Therefore, the one who swears by the altar swears both by the altar and by everything in it, on it. And the one who swears by the temple swears both by the temple and by him who dwells in it. And the one who swears by heaven swears both by the throne of God and by him who sits upon it. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin and have neglected the weightier provisions of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. But these are the things you should have done without neglecting the others. You blind guides who strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you clean the outside of the cup and the dish, but inside they're full of robbery and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and of the dish, so that the outside of it may also become clean. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which on the outside appear beautiful, but inside they are full of dead men's bones and all uncleanness. So you too outwardly appear righteous to people, but inwardly you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you build the tombs for the prophets and decorate the monuments of the righteous. And you say, if we had been living in the days of our fathers, we would not have been partners with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. You testify against yourselves that you are sons of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of the guilt of your fathers, you snakes, you offspring of vipers. How will you escape the sentence of hell? Therefore, behold, I'm sending you prophets and wise men and scribes. Some of them you'll kill and crucify. Some of them you'll flog in your synagogues and persecute from city to city, so that upon you will fall the guilt of all the righteous blood shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, the son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Truly I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones those who have been sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together the way a hen gathers her chicks under her wings. But you were unwilling. Behold, your house is being left to you desolate. For I say to you, from now on, you will not see me until you say, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord.
Wow. So this is tough, man. I mean, this is when, maybe more than any other time I think we've seen Jesus speak, this is when he sounds the most like an Old Testament prophet bringing condemnation upon his people. You know, one of the things I think is really important in this is to catch at the end of this reading in this chapter where he expresses his heart about this. I think it's hard anytime we speak to people we love in harsh terms like this. Woe to you, you do this wrong, you've done this wrong, you've done this wrong. It's important that people understand that's coming from a place of love. And when Jesus says at the end, like, I wanted to gather you under my wings like a hen gathers her chicks, you know, like, I love you so much and I don't want to depart from you. I don't want to be separated from you. But the way he says it is, you were unwilling. You just didn't want God in your life. Like, you wanted to talk about him, you wanted to make an appearance about it, but you didn't want to be close with God, because here I am and you want nothing to do with me. This is a heart-wrenching, soul-searching section.
Yeah.
We could talk about this a long time. I think there's a lot of things to apply in this section.
Yes. No joke. Well, and your comparison, I think it's worth just really, really embracing the spirit of this. And it is a lot like the prophets, where you read the prophets or a passage like this, you're like, woof, that's pretty harsh. But it's so clear when you read through the prophets, that's where you learn about the mercy and the mourning of God more than anywhere else, where he's genuinely brokenhearted over what's going on with his people. And that's what's going on with Jesus here. I mean, he is pronouncing really harsh judgments and disappointment. And I don't know if anger is the right word, but it's pretty close. But it's all out of anguish and pain and regret and sorrow over how they've rejected all the good stuff he's trying to do for them. I mean, that's what would be so hard if you were Jesus. Like, man, like, I'm looking at you. I fed you. I raised your grandma from the dead, you know, or whatever. I did all these things. And you can't even see. Like, you just can't accept me because whatever. I didn't fit your profile for what a Messiah was supposed to be. or I'm challenging the way that you're living, but I'm trying to do this good stuff for you and you just won't take it. That's how God feels about us all the time. So, like you said, because he regrets the way we go in our sin, he's trying to wake us up with sometimes some really hard words to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. I think verse 1's important, who Jesus is speaking to. So Jesus is speaking to the crowds and to his disciples. The last chapter we looked at, all these scribes and Pharisees are coming at him, testing him, challenging him. He's kind of exposed the hypocrisy of all of that. But now he's addressing these people that he knows could be swayed easily by these leaders. And I really like the way Jesus balances this. He doesn't say, never listen to a word these guys say. What he says is, hey, these guys are usually speaking the things of God. They've set themselves in the seat of Moses. They're talking from scripture. You do the things they tell you to do. The laws that they communicate are good.
Yep.
But be really careful about being influenced by their example and their culture. You know, like, again, this isn't an exact parallel, but I kind of made this point at the beginning. It's hard for us to understand how easily influenced we are by our culture. You know, like how people around us that are in positions of power or leadership or authority, how much that might affect the way we see the world, right? There's a lot of discussion about that these days.
Mm-hmm.
People in powerful positions, how do they look at the world? In what ways have they been unjust and unfair or used their power wrongly? And then, of course, some of the arguments we get into is, well, you know, aren't the laws of our land good? Yeah, most of the laws of our land are good. Do the laws, you know, all the things that are written into the laws of our land are usually fairly good things. Don't kill people, you know, don't be unjust, don't be unfair, you can't discriminate. But the fact of the matter is, even if those laws are real, there are examples from lots of cultures to have bad attitudes and to do the wrong thing. And you know, one of the things Jesus keeps repeating in this text is that these Pharisees are blind. They don't see it.
Yeah.
But he's telling his disciples, don't be blind. Like, open your eyes, understand what's good, and you live that out, but be careful about how you're influenced by your culture.
Yeah. Well, and I love this because I worry a lot of times, and I'm sure I'm even more influenced by this than I think. A lot of times people talk about that cultural influence thing. You can't escape that. If you're a man, this is how you're going to behave. If you're a woman, if you're black, if you're white, if you're rich, if you're poor, if you're American, if you're whatever, this is just how you think. This is just how you are.
Right.
But Jesus says, no,
Right.
there's actually reality that you can tap into. So, hey, Jewish people, you're not the culture that the Pharisees and scribes and Sadducees have created. That doesn't dictate your behavior. Listen to what they have to say, because the reason why you should listen to what they have to say is not because they're Pharisees, but as long as whenever they're sitting in the chair of Moses, whenever they're, in other words, speaking the word of God, listen to that and do that. It's such a liberating thing. It's kind of similar to what Jesus said in John 8. If you continue in my word, you'll be my disciples and you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Freedom from cultural failures and the frustrations that come along with that, freedom from just being a part of whatever culture is. If we go to what God has said and what the expectations God has laid out, we can be set free from not only our own personal failings, but also whatever's wrong in the culture around us. Yeah, they're still going to do the bad stuff, but I'm going to live in God's reality. And that's what Jesus is trying to exhort here is, hey, listen, I mean, eventually he's going to hammer on the Pharisees and scribes of all the failures they had where they were doing unreality. You guys are mixing things up. You're twisting things in your own cultural thing. But I love here at the top, he just says, hey, you go to God's stuff and you do God's stuff, and you don't have to be beholden to whatever cultural expectations may exist. That is not a popular message in our world. And as Christians, we got to be careful to not buy into notions that, like, well, I'm American, therefore I think this, or well, I'm this ethnicity, therefore I think that, or well, I'm a man, or I'm older, I'm young, or whatever. No, God, yeah, I'm going to shut up. Anyway, that's it.
No, I think that's good.
Going on thing.
You know, so when he begins to kind of give his expose here of what's the problem, verse 4, he says, these guys tie up heavy burdens lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves are unwilling to move them with as much as their finger. I got to tell you, it's sections like this in the Bible that make me afraid to be a teacher.
Yeah.
Like these passages scare me.
Yeah.
You know, when I begin to realize that, you know, what am I trying to do as a teacher, as a preacher? Now, we'll talk about here in a minute that none of us should be called those things, right? We're just
Right.
trying to share the things of God. But the reality is, James even says in James 3, let not many of you become teachers. You're going to have a judgment you have to live up to. Have you ever done this, Ben? Like where you get up and preach a sermon and you want to say like exactly what God says about something. And so you're like, hey, man, here's what the Bible says. Here's what God says. This is the standard we've got to live up to. And all the while that you're saying it, you keep thinking to yourself, I don't do this very well. Like
Mm-hmm.
I know my shortcoming in this. But there's like this cultural pressure as a preacher to not show anybody any weakness, you know? Like, nah, man, I got this nailed. I got this licked. Like, I know what I'm doing here. When we play these games sometimes with ourselves, that we find ways around being obedient to God's word.
Yeah.
Like, this is condemning and difficult and scary. Um, I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are. Do you think in verse 4, when he's saying they tie up heavy burdens and lay them on men's shoulders, he's saying they even teach extra things that God didn't teach? Or could he just be saying the standards of God's law are heavy? They're those things are not easy to bear. The problem with them is they're just not willing to try to live up to what they're teaching. I'm not sure which it is, or if it could be a little bit of both.
It could be, although it's interesting to me. I think my normal picture in my head of the Pharisees and the Jews is that they were adding things.
Sure.
But this passage and others, Jesus makes pretty clear they were taking things away. Like, for instance, hey, you don't want to take care of your parents? Well, just give that money to the temple, and then you can I mean, I don't think the Pharisees generally were adding a lot. I know they were particular about a lot of things and meticulous about some things like the garden herbs and stuff. But even that, Jesus' point is, you guys did kind of the easy one. I mean, the annoying one, the garden herbs, but you didn't do the hard work of being good to your fellow man. So I think you're onto it there, that they're willing to say, here's what God says, at least about some things, but are unwilling to do it, which is such a contrast to earlier. We looked in chapter 11 where Jesus said, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Well, that's a burden. Jesus is saying, like, hey, there is a burden you got to carry. But the whole point of that is, I'm meek and lowly of heart, and you'll find rest for your souls. Jesus came saying, I'll carry the burden alongside you. I'll help you. I'll lead you and guide you. Whereas these men were just dropping the burden on people and saying, all right, good luck, or not good luck. I don't care. And
Yeah.
that's, to me, I mean, back to your point, just about the reality of this as a teacher and preacher, it is, I mean, I feel compelled a lot of times to say, this is a really hard one for me, guys, but we got to figure it out, because I don't know, it feels really dishonest to just throw that out there and to not ever admit the challenge that we face, and even to come alongside one another and not act like, oh, I'm just going to tell everybody what's what, and I'm never going to um, be honest about my own challenges or try to be involved actually in people's lives. That's kind of, I mean, that's one way I read verse 4 is they tie up the burden and say, okay, you need to do all this, but there's no real care to actually help somebody to do it. There's no real involvement in someone's life on a personal level, it seems like.
Yeah. And then the danger of verse 5, you know, Jesus started all of his sermons in Matthew with this same problem about doing deeds to be seen by others and then thinking that that's the reality of our situation. You know, how much effort do we put into like making sure that other people think we're something, you know? And then when they think I'm something, I think it about me too. Um, man, how do we get rid of that? Like, how do we get to the point where we simply just don't really care what other people's opinions are?
Yeah.
And what we really care about is whether or not God sees the inside of us and knows it's clean and knows that what it ought to be. Um, what's the equivalent of verse 5 in our life? You is it how you portray yourself on social media? Is it, you know, I remember, I think I've told this story about when I started preaching and my dad was cautioning me about letting my ego get involved. Like, it's unfortunate how many times I've run into guys who what they care so much about preaching is what everybody thinks about them. You know, I am this guy and I'm the guy in charge and I look at all the things I do. And then getting away from preachers, just us Christians in the way that we interact with people in our congregations.
People do this with kids a lot, it seems to me. Like, I want my kids to act certainly not like I want my kids to be formed into the image of Christ, but hey, don't shame me and your mom. Like,
Don't mess up this family. Yeah.
right, right, that kind of thing. This is really reminiscent of the Sermon on the Mount, and I think that one gives a little bit of insight that if we could turn our attention, like Jesus said, hey, don't be like the Pharisees who blow the trumpet whenever they help a poor person out or make their face look bad whenever they're fasting.
Mm-hmm.
What you need to understand is God knows you're fasting and he appreciates what you're doing there. God knows whenever you help a poor person and he appreciates it. Probably one of the best remedies to this problem in verse 5 and kind of verse 6 a little bit too is to recognize that we are already noticed. We're noticed by someone much more important than our fellow church members or our neighbors or our coworkers or whatever. We're noticed by the creator of all things, and not just noticed like, interesting. We're noticed by a loving father who really, really honors us and exalts us in his own eyes. I mean, verse 6, the thing about loving the chief seats, what chiefer seat could there be than sitting at in the heavenly places, like the book of Ephesians would describe it, or sitting on thrones that Jesus promised to the apostles? What chiefer seat could there be? And if we would appreciate being noticed by God, being exalted by God, being loved by God, if I could focus on that, that's going to help me to suppress any temptation I may have to impress other people or to get honor from other people or lie about who I really am to try to trick other people into thinking I'm something special.
Yeah. You know, some of the answer of this might be in verse 6 when Jesus calls out what their affection is for, when he says they love this. I mean, who of us doesn't love being thought important, you know, and kind of having a place where we're honored? Like, it's just such it's ingrained in us almost from the time that we're young. I remember one of the things I used to say to my kids a lot when they were growing up, when they were young, because you know they would do something. You know how your kids will do something and they're like, "Hey, Dad, did you see that? Watch this." What are they looking for when they do that? Well, they're looking for applause. They're looking for praise. One of the greatest challenges is trying to find, well, a balance between doing things that are good, but how does the proverb say it? Let another praise you and not your own lips. And I
Yeah.
remember I used to say that to my kids a lot when they would brag. I'd be like, hey, let another praise you and not your own lips. Um, but I needed that advice as much as anybody, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think what you're pointing out, by the way, is important. A lot of these things, like a lot of bad things that we do, it's not a bad thing. Like God, I think God made us with that desire for praise and affirmation and acceptance. The problem is we look for it in the wrong places. And that's what's so sad is the Pharisees who were being portrayed themselves and were viewed as the people that were closest to God and knew God's will the best. They were basically they were themselves exhibiting and therefore teaching other people, hey, the way to tap into that need for acceptance and affirmation is from other people. And so we're going to structure our religious system in such a way that it's all about that. And it wasn't really about God. And it's so easy. That's just sort of the natural force of gravity, it feels like, in a sinful world for religious practice. That's why so many people say, I'm not really into religion. Well, you should be. Religion is about being bound to God, being close to God. That's a great thing. But the problem, I get why people say it, because it turns into this too often, where it just
Sure.
becomes about worshiping each other as opposed to worshiping and being loved and loving and being approved and pleasing God. That's what they were missing. And it's so easy to slip into that.
Yeah. So Jesus in verse 12, verse 11 and 12, the greatest will be your servant, and whoever exalts himself will be humbled. Whoever humbles himself will be exalted. Man, keep in mind that at the end of this week, Jesus is going to humble himself in the greatest way possible.
Yeah.
Like, he does not need to go there and be called the king. He needs to go there and give his life as a ransom for many. Um, this is not just a lesson we need to learn as individuals, it's a lesson we need to learn in our churches.
Hmm.
We don't need to exalt our local church in a bunch of ways. We just need to be the people of God and be humble about it and live our lives in service. And God will cause growth from that. Um, yeah, so
Uh,
many good things in the first 12 verses here.
yeah, and I mean, just one more thing, just to kind of echo that. Verses 8 through 10, it's funny. Jesus doesn't say, "Let none of you be rabbis," or
Right.
"Let none of you be teachers," or "Let none of you be leaders." Maybe the leader one is the only one that comes close to saying that by saying, "Be a servant." But really, all of them is, don't worry about what you're called. Don't worry
Right.
about what other people say about you. Just go do the thing. Go be a rabbi. Go be a teacher. Go be a servant leader. And
Right.
who cares what people call you? Don't be interested in the title. Don't be called father. But yeah, you know what? Go care for people like a father would. But know the whole time that you're only doing it because of your father who's cared for you. You're only teaching what you've already been taught by your true teacher. You're only leading as the great servant leader Jesus Christ has led. And if we think in those terms of what can I do for God, and less what can I do to convince people to think something good about me, we'll be in a lot better shape. We'll be a lot more full and content, and we'll be much less foolish and sinful if we just be focused on what we can do for God as opposed to tricking people into thinking something special about us.
Good. And that thing that he's saying about don't be called rabbi, don't be called teacher, don't be called father, he's saying it from both directions. He's saying, like, look, if you're in a position to be a teacher or a leader or whatever, don't call yourself that. But he's also saying that to his disciples, don't call anybody else that. Don't become so enamored with leadership that you put your hope in them. I mean, how many people's faith have been wrecked because they thought of their preacher or their elder or somebody in a position too highly, and then when that person didn't turn out to be what they thought, they gave up on God. This is really key to not being influenced too much by your culture. Um, don't think too highly of people. Don't think too highly of yourself. We're all just servants in this kingdom, and we're gonna mess up, but we need to learn what we should from each other.
Yeah. And I just one more thing on a private thing. I'm kind of testing out. Tell me if I'm being stupid here, if I've missed the thing on this. I've noticed. I mean, I've never heard anybody in our in churches I've been a part of call somebody father so and so, like very against that, right? What I have heard a lot of is certain people would be like, "Oh yeah, Andy's doing this, Ben's doing that, and brother so and so is going to do such and such." And it's like, okay, like was Andy not a brother? Like I'm confused. Why are we calling that? And I think I know for me, like in at least the southern United States, you call people Mister or Miss or whatever.
Right.
So it's like just a replacement. It feels a little too formal to call that person who's in the family of God. So maybe it's fine, but
Yeah.
I do think it contributes to what you're saying, where certain people, I'm gonna call them brother so and so or sister so and so, almost like this elevated title. Maybe I'm being stupid about that, but I think that's a way. I guess my point is, I don't think Jesus is giving a conclusive list here. Don't say these three titles. Any other title is fine. I think his whole thing is don't think of people, don't think of each other in terms of titles. So I'm not trying to bash if people call each other brother, sister, or whatever, but
I
it is
get
kind
it.
of funny to me that maybe that's a version of how we can slip into this
Right.
in other ways, but that may be stupid.
The reason you and I don't get called that is because you have bedhead and I wear a baseball hat. Like, sometimes it's just the way you carry yourself.
That's right.
Um,
Uh,
so our time went really fast. I thought we were going to get a little
done.
bit further on here. Um, but again, just to reiterate, these first 12 verses, Jesus is mostly exposing what he sees in the leadership and saying to his disciples, be really, really careful about how these people can influence you. But then when we get to verse 13, he's going to just start out loud saying, woe to you, Pharisees. You know, woe isn't just telling a horse to stop. Like, this is bad news, man. Like, this is why God was going to remove himself from Jerusalem and eventually destroy the city, which is the next couple chapters coming up. So I suppose in our next couple of discussions, we'll continue to work through these woes in this chapter.
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody. This was really fun. I know I didn't talk to you this before, Andy, but I know Monday I'm going to be unavailable. I don't know what's your deal, but anyway, everybody, you just you can watch like we do. We'll post the deal and let everybody know what's going on.
All right, sounds good. Thanks everybody for being with us. We appreciate it.
See y'all next time.